welcome to the 24th episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be discussing the film The Social Network, a 2010 film directed by David Fincher. And I think the screenplay is by Aaron Sorkin, who I'm a big fan of. Basically, real quick, it's a really easy synopsis. This film kind of like drama is a drama version of like
Dramatization.
dramatization of the like basically the founding and the early stages of Facebook, right? I mean, I think now if you're listening to our pod, like you probably are aware that Facebook now is a freaking monopoly giant company. But people forget that, like, and I guess we lived through this, but people forget that at one point it was just really a website that people were just signing up, and they maybe only had like 200,000 users, 500,000 users, and basically, we'll get into the movie and the scenes because I think it pretty much tells the story, and we'll discuss these interesting tidbits. But basically, that's what the film's about, and how it's actually constructed is interesting, right? So it tells the story through flashbacks, but also this is probably where it's fictionalized, right? Through litigation proceedings, right? Like they're all basically litigators are questioning like each of the main characters, and they're sharing their side of the story, and it's kind of crafted that way, which just a jumpstart, I guess, what did you think of that kind of style, right? Because it's kind of hard sometimes to do a documentary basically without turning into a documentary.
Yeah, can you repeat it? You cut out there for a second. I just want to make sure I got your question.
Basically, like the style of the film, you know how like it's done through a bit of flashbacks, but the mechanism they use is basically through lawyer getting
the litigation.
The litigation, like using that as a format to tell the story. What did you think of that? Because like often the problem with these, let's say drama documentaries is like they have to tell us like the factual story, but at the same time not like just sound like narration,
You're talking about when they're going through the deposition proceedings.
Yeah,
right.
That's basically how they told the story.
Yeah, exactly. It was all little flashbacks, like things. Oh, what did you say on this night? And then they'll flash back to that night. I kind of deal. I actually liked it. I thought that the sort of feel and the pace for this film really went well in the way it was executed. It also really helped that the acting, I thought, was really strong by all of the characters in this movie. Especially, I forgot the actor's name who played Mark Zuckerberg. I thought he was spot on in terms of making or sort of portraying Zuckerberg at that point as being very socially awkward, yet very, very arrogant and egotistical from early on. And from what I've heard, it's not right from early Zuckerberg. I was also very surprised. I got to give a shout out to another film where Justin Timberlake was in. I was very pleasantly surprised by his acting as Sean Parker, who was the founder of the app. That like when I was a child. When I saw that, I was like, "Oh, Napster, man! It's been a long time since I've heard that company name." But they were a big deal when we were growing up. So yeah, I gotta just give like some credit to the cast. They really made them stronger than it otherwise would have been. Because it's sort of a generic storyline. I can't necessarily say that anything was super unique about this film that differentiates it from other documentary style films that I've seen before, but overall the flow and the acting really made this a really enjoyable watch. This is my first time watching it. I know you've seen this. Like, was this your second time viewing it?
No, it was my third.
Okay,
but with gaps. I saw it in 2010, I believe, like 2014, and then now. So there's been some big year gaps there. But yeah, I guess that's what's crazy, right? It's been 10 years, right? So like. The film stops at a certain point, but the Facebook story didn't stop, which is interesting. Well, I'll probably dissect that a little bit, but
sure.
Yeah, I think with the film, what was interesting is that, it's like you said, like it basically has to be like a drama, right? Like it has to be about the acting and writing, because this is not really a story this is a human story, right? It's not really like special effects or anything crazy.
No.
So I think that's something that is like it's the hard part of the film, right? Because it's not going to flash you with anything else but it's writing and acting, right? I will say that, yeah, I agree with so Jesse Eisenberg, he portrayed Mark Zuckerberg. I do agree that the performances were pretty strong, especially the leads, right? I think one of the things that people forget is that Andrew Garfield, who's had other great roles like after this film, he also is really good in this film. I think like all the main characters were strong, even the Winklevoss twins, they had good performances. So,
oh yeah.
With that, with that aside, I guess before we get into maybe the meat of the plot, is there anything about the film that like style wise you're like, it doesn't really click, I don't like it, or
trying to think if there was any specific moment where that stuck out that I didn't quite like. I don't know if there was a particular moment where that happened. Overall, I thought that the flow was pretty good, at least just from my viewing sort of pleasure in this movie. Was there anything that stuck out to you for this like third watch that you didn't particularly like?
I will say that like the music was okay. Like now the third time I was like, it's just kind of like this background noise. While like there's other movies that I've seen that I've rewatched where I'm like, oh, the musical score.
It really fits.
It really like the lines in the music is almost like a perfect like mesh.
Yeah, I can't say that the soundtrack really stuck out to me on this one.
I guess this is the issue sometimes with movies is like, when they capture a slice of time. I've seen a lot of Zuckerberg depositions with Congress recently, and he's definitely changed and had coaching because how he is now versus even when you see interviews of a 2008 Zuckerberg is like, honestly, it seems kind of
night and day.
It's alienish as I would describe it. So, but I guess that's me projecting onto the film. So I guess film itself, it's a very like it's 2 hours about. I think it's 2 hours and like 4 minutes. And it does have like a pace where you're done watching, and you're like, oh, it's over, right? Like we've done movies where we're like, even the ones we like, we're like, oh, this is like 2 hours and 20 minutes. It does feel like it,
Yeah.
And even other movies that are short, we're like, oh, it's like, wow, that was really short, right? This one felt like it just like you're watching, like it's 2 hours, and it's like, oh, it's like you can sit there and you can watch it, and it's a very like to your point, it has a very seamless flow experience to the film's credit, because I think that's actually it's underappreciated. I think that's why I like when we're like last week we were doing Absentia, and remember my criticism of that film is that it felt like the writing was like the flow was sometimes like it was a bit disjointed.
Actually, so after you finish, there is something that just came to mind that I'll bring up. Go ahead.
Oh, nice. Yes. Yeah. And I guess these type of films, maybe I have a little preference for them just because like I do like writing that kind of flows versus like
a little more choppy,
bad writing where even like the scenarios don't make sense or the lines are like, okay.
Are you talking about Cooley Man?
Oh, which one?
Remember Cooley High?
Even though I didn't have that much issue with that script, it was more of the tone.
But certain scenes you were annoyed with, like the car chase.
Oh yeah, that was so gimmicky. Which it would have been fine if it was a pure comedy, but it was a mix of a serious film, and I was just like, you can't go this crazy with the funny. Like you can have some funny, like there's some funny lines in The Social Network, but the tone is kind of like consistent. I would say I think like our best example of like poor screenwriting is probably the one we did last week. That was that's an obvious, like you can tell that like even from Cooley High, it's like a step down that script,
Sure.
But go ahead with your point.
Oh, so I think the one I was thinking back at it. The one issue I had is I didn't quite like the ending, to be honest. Like it all started with Erica Albright and sort of like how he gets rejected, and that puts him into like it sort of set that moment of him being rejected puts in this sequence of events, and then it goes back with him adding her like on adding her at the end because he like never really got over her. I don't know. I quite for some reason I just didn't like the ending. I thought it was just a weird way to end it.
And I think, the ending to me is kind of like, I guess endings are important, but I would say with this film, it's one of those things where it's like whatever, it ended.
It's really not that important, but I don't know. I thought they could have done ended it in a different way, a better way.
I think what Fincher was trying to go with was that like Zuckerberg is creating this network that connects all the people, but he can't connect with people. But then again, this is where posterity hurts. Where I've seen a lot of interviews, and I've seen interviews with him and his wife, and I go like, I don't think he can't connect with people. I just think that he does have a massive ego.
Yeah,
which they do capture really well. But Yeah, I agree. Where like he's going with this message of, you know, he built this platform that connects billions of people, but he can't connect with people, and it's like, not with time. You're like, that's a bit like preaching a bit.
Yeah,
I think your point is very valid, you know, and also even in the film
but
itself,
he did connect with Sean Parker too. I mean, that's really he connected with some people. It's just not everybody.
I think like you bring up a great point. I think with the ending, you see that like the creative team were kind of projecting what they think Zuckerberg's fault is, when I would say I disagree with that kind of.
Yeah, I was just, I don't know. I was like, oh, this is a really good film, and then I was just left a little like empty at the ending. I don't know.
It's also hard to end this film because the story wasn't finished, right? Like
I continue.
Yeah. So I agree that I would have preferred a different ending, but when I rewatch this film, I kind of just ignore the last scenes because it's like, okay, you know, whatever. Yeah. and actually that probably reflects in my rating a little bit because I am someone who believes that endings are important. But let's go back to, I guess, the strong points of the film, because I think the film has like great, like throughout there's individual scenes that are great. But if we go back to the beginning, right, where he's doing the you mentioned it before when we were offline, right? They're at the bar, right? Zuckerberg and Erica Albright, and then he is clearly like just.
Oh yeah, so like he just get
dumpster fire, right? But go ahead.
So it was just interesting because the way it was not a very flattering portrayal of Zuckerberg in the early days, and from what I've heard, you probably read more than I have on him himself, like books on Zuckerberg, but it was just interesting because I always got this vibe that he was probably very awkward and egotistical during his college days, and they hit it sort of nail right on the head. So he's dating Erica Albright, and he's just trying to be supportive because he really wants to get into. This is something I assume they're basically like smart frats, if you will, these final clubs, and so he really wants to get into them. And she asked him a question like, "Oh, well, which one's the easiest?" And then he gets very defensive at that point. Like, why would you ask which one's the easiest? I was just curious. And then she said, "All right." Then he gets very defensive, saying, "Are you saying like I couldn't get into like any of them, so I gotta like try for the easiest?" No, I'm just saying that anyone has a better shot at getting into the easiest. But then he just gets he goes from defensive to offensive and just destroys her. And he insults her. I can't remember exactly what he says. But she ends up saying, "No, I need to go study. You don't need to go study." And she's like, how do you know that I don't need to go study? "Oh, because you go to BU." And I just heard that line. I was like, oh, there's no way you can recover from that at that point. That's just like shots fired to the max. And then he doesn't quite understand that she's very upset at the moment or what he said wrong. Remember, he said, "Are you mad? Wait, you really mad? Oh, then I apologize." Right? It's like it didn't even register that he could have offended her.
Yeah,
so it was a good sequence. It was just like, man, I was like, that's brutal. That's a brutal sort of portrayal of not being able to read the situation.
Yeah, and I think what's important about that opening scene is that it kind of sets the tone of the movie in the sense that like the style of the movie is pretty much present there, right? Whippy dialogue, and like if you notice in that scene, their lines start out like slow, like they're both talking, taking a pause, and then like you said, when Zuckerberg kind of does his whips, it just boom, 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 right? That's something that I do like about this film that I don't see often, is that like I credit to the actors and the screenplay writers, because
straight shots, man.
That's a very like you don't see that kind of quality all the time in movies, right? Where the flow in that one scene to change, right? Like from we're just chatting to bam, 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 and the tone changes, and then the lines, like the dialogue, like
what you're saying is escalates quickly.
Yeah, and then like it de-escalates because either the scene flips or like they resolve it or they cut away or something.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that's something that I did like about the movie. But yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I'll get into this later because I've read a lot of articles, obviously, but I read the book that's really good that came out recently, Facebook: The Inside Story, and it's also a good novel on kind of like not just Facebook at its origin, which is the beginning, but also how it became kind of like the platform it is today with Instagram, with WhatsApp, with the news feed. I think people don't often remember that, like most people, I think, especially in the United States, but I think in the world, I think I have the US data that I think it's like 57% of Americans get their first news, like where they, in their news feed.
Through Facebook.
Yeah. So it's a powerful platform, even though at the time they hadn't really figured all that out. The other book I read about Facebook that is really interesting is Chaos Monkeys, which is all about how when Facebook was trying to become profitable, they were having issues, right? Because the issue in the movie touches about
Yeah.
this, where like they don't want to. They don't.
Do we advertise?
Yeah, don't we want to? We don't want to have the typical advertise. So how do we advertise? And this guy who wrote the Chaos Monkeys book, he was a product guy, and he was trying to build a product that would be basically monetizable for Facebook. His product didn't win out, but he talks about how like chaotic and how kind of like all or nothing stakes. The one who would end up figuring this out is his name is famous is Chamath, but yeah, I mean it's Facebook is a story that I love reading about because like the personality still like they are making impact today. Like there's another minor character in this film who's a minor character in this film, but actually probably big in the Silicon Valley scenes. Dustin Moskovitz, and he started another company that just IPO'd this year, Asana, which is all about project management. So if you know about, Jira and Trello, it's in that kind of realm, except it's supposed to be better. I haven't used it, but you see that like the Facebook, even though it's a monolith now, you can argue, it's spun off individuals who have gone to continue. It reminds me of the PayPal mafia, right? Like, the people that started YouTube, Tesla with Elon Musk and other companies, they came out of the PayPal, and Facebook has also
Peter Thiel, yeah.
Peter Thiel, and Facebook has also churned out people to start their own businesses and make massive IPOs. So, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So
yeah, what's interesting is if you follow basically most of the people that are connected within this Facebook story, they've all done pretty well for themselves. After it's like, yeah, they had all these lawsuits, but like Eduardo, for example, he's like is just a VC in Singapore now. It's crazy net worth of like 13 billion. Then you look at the Winklevoss twins; they came out with 60 mil, and now they're huge into crypto, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you can't really feel sorry for anyone within this story.
Yeah, because they all make money.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the early themes of the film, and we'll get to some individual scenes that I personally loved, but if you go to the early themes of the film, like you were saying, you touched upon it with the fraternities, right? There is the established elite.
Yeah.
And this is the Silicon Valley thing that I can't let go of myself because I love emboldening this. I love embodying this myself.
Go ahead.
But there's the established elite, and then there is the kind of like, how do I say it? Like
the new age.
I wouldn't even say new age, but maybe the overlooked disruptors. You could tell like from the beginning that Zuckerberg has a distaste for like I said, these Final Club people, and the way they talk to him.
What it kind of reminds me of is like Zuckerberg kind of represents, let's make a Gatsby reference. All these people are like old money, right? And Zuckerberg's coming in and disrupt or to try to find a way to disrupt. And he's basically not in that realm. So he's more like new money, right? And so it's really interesting. And it's very fitting because they're on the East Coast in the Boston area, even though Gatsby took place on like Long Island. But it's still sort of, you see that sort of, that schism between the two, especially when Zuckerberg always clashes with the Winklevosses. I think that's like when it's most apparent.
Yeah, exactly. And then even before, like he clashes with the Winklevosses, right? He gets notoriety because of the face smash scene, right? Which actually did happen.
Did it really? I didn't read about that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, he took down the Harvard network. Yeah, because the traffic was too high.
Was it with an app that was similar to that?
Pretty much, yeah. It was like just rate like people like up or thumbs up, thumbs down. So, and
what do you know what sparked him to actually do that?
So the Erica Albright
is
fictional, so I don't know what actually sparked him to do that.
Was it just a bet with his friends?
I'm trying to remember, but it's maybe it is kind of like true. Like I know that the Erica Albright thing is like her character is fictional, but I remember that I'm reading that she's like a mashup of different females that Zuckerberg interacted with, and so I don't know if like it was still like I don't think
so. There was some truth to it.
I don't know if it was because of the girl though. Only thing I read into it by reading a couple of books is that it was something that he just it was kind of like, we're guys, so we kind of know this. So they're I think they were like drinking after like late at night, and they just came up with the random thought like, can we rank girls? And they just went for it, and Zuckerberg did most of the coding. I don't know if like really like that like I said, I don't know what led to that conversation was like talking about getting dumped and stuff, but it was something that it was in the college dorm room, and it was like them all getting drunk doing it. Yeah. And
dang, all right. So I have direct quotes here. I'll just read them real quick. So yeah, I guess like how they portray Zuckerberg, or the actor who plays Zuckerberg in the film, as entering into blogs. So apparently Mark Zuckerberg himself actually wrote some blog posts saying, here's one, and I quote, "I'm a little intoxicated, not gonna lie. So what if it's not even 10 p.m. and it's a Tuesday night? What? The Kirkland dorm Facebook is open on my desktop, and some of these people have pretty horrendous Facebook pics. I almost want to put some of these faces next to pictures of farm animals and have people vote on which is more attractive." Dang. Hey, and then he says a little bit later, yeah, it's on. I'm not exactly sure how the farm animals are going to fit into this whole thing. You can't really ever be sure with farm animals, but I like the idea of comparing two people together. Man, so yeah, he was pretty ruthless at that point. So like a lot of that sequence seems to be true.
Yeah, I think what's, like I said, the creative decisions is around a lot of the Erica Albright character. That's what's creative. Mm-hmm. But like I've read that like he that app did exist, and he did code it. But like the reason being like a breakup is probably like a guess, because there's no evidence of it. But it's how guys are. I'm not surprised that maybe like it started like as a conversation about that, and it led to especially I know like, ironically, software engineers like Mark. So the the God complex in the
you are an engineer, bro.
I'm a blue collar worker. Anyways, it's the ego in basically in computer science, especially. I might be changing now. I read better things, but I doubt it. Actually, I don't want to get into that right now, but it is probably changing because of the tech bro culture. But I would say that between 2002 and I'm probably the last of this era in 2014, 2015. There's like 10 years of like this romanticism of like, the brilliant nerd, as I would say it. And, it captured a lot through Zuckerberg's character, right? Like he's downtrodden like in the beginning, but where he ends up, even though the director tries to spin it where, oh, he's lonely. Look, we know that like in 2020, he ain't that lonely. He's doing fine. Right. He's actually now influencing politics in California. So like, I think, that's where like, I think the movie has not aged well. Like the style and the substance is like very, like you can probably watch it 10 years from now. But a lot of maybe the themes that the director and the screenwriters are trying to portray about Zuckerberg probably haven't. But yeah, like it's.
Oh like man, he's kind of a ruthless mastermind now. Now he's even trying to. For a while, he was trying to make his own cryptocurrency.
Exactly. So, I think in that regard, the movie has not aged that well. But yeah, like the face smash thing. Like what's interesting about this film is that like even Zuckerberg has a hard time saying like he dislikes the film. Like he said, his portrayal isn't great, and probably not how he sees himself. But most people who are like other than him even say like you said, like you said it earlier, the best way, like. It's still a mix of basically more true than not true. If you take out the creative changes,
Well, even you said that you read it from the Winklevoss's account, but they said it's about 90% true.
Yeah, when they were talking to Portnoy, yeah. And so I having read enough about the early era of Facebook, I also agree that it's probably like obviously there's creative differences always, but a young Zuckerberg was kind of like the perfect embodiment of what I think a Silicon Valley 2006 was. Like I'm here to disrupt. I'm here to break all the rules. And look, he said it himself. It used to be the famous slogan, right, for Facebook: "Move fast and break things." I mean, that is what his philosophy was, right? Like they don't get like because it's still the early days. The movie's focused on early days into the beginning years of Facebook. But like even in that 2011 year when they only had I think 500 engineers, I forgot how many, but they were all about they were like the first company actually, and this is something I can speak to that, really focused on you write code at 9 a.m. and you deployed it at 5 p.m. that was something that people forget in the mid 2000s. That wasn't the norm. The norm was, I wrote my code. It's going to go out next month or next quarter. Facebook was one of the, and there was other companies too. Google also tried to do this too, but Google was more guarded. You know, they did have a little more structure, but Facebook was known especially in 07, like I write code in the night, like in the morning, and it shipped at lunch, like, or whenever it was ready, it shipped. Now that's why they broke a lot of stuff, but they move fast, and that's how you create a buzz around Facebook's engineering practices, because they would get stuff out like 6 months before, like other companies would. And when Chamath joined in, because Chamath is a great part of the story too, you know, he was able to bring that kind of mentality to the product side of like, okay, you have this data point, act on it. Okay, you did this A/B test. Okay, this A test failed. Go with B. Now iterate again, and don't stop until we get the numbers we want. And don't care about the rules. Like, oh, we need emails. That's another thing we'll talk about too, is the email scene. You know, we'll get the emails, and we'll just, you know, we'll get more users, because it was all about growth. You know, the growth team was the Chamath team. And so some context. His last name is Chamath Palihapitiya, right?
Yeah, he's Sri Lankan.
Yeah, his background is that he was so. To give you the quick summary, so I'm not taking too much time in the podcast, you know, he worked at AOL before Facebook. And at AOL, he felt that he was, you know, his ideas were being pushed like to the side, because it was, you know, the boys club. Right? You do this a certain way. He actually advised AOL to buy Facebook, and I think in 2005. They said no, because they were like, this site doesn't make money. All the normal rules, right? It doesn't make money. Who's going to use this? It's just for college kids. Chamath was like, you guys are going to make the biggest mistake of your company's history. Okay, that ended up being true. I also like how Chamath always has to talk like that. Never like.
But I mean, it's true with these old. Look, in the internet age, AOL is more like a brick and mortar type of company. It's just how it is. Like, it's kind of those grandfathers. They have that the old timey kind of mentality, if you will. Other one that's a perfect example of that is like what went down with Blockbuster. They had a chance to buy Netflix at one point, but they couldn't see the vision. And that ends up killing these companies. Exactly. I think Chamath was probably very frustrated with the ineptitude of leadership.
Yeah, and that's why he actually pushed himself to join Facebook, because he saw it as like basically the next century's Google, basically. And the little recap there is that all the strategies around that we see today, especially even though it's coming across industries, about like being like nimble and the feedback loop and iterating and like just continuous improvement, that all really stemmed from the Facebook product teams, and he was one of the heads of those product divisions. So it's, you know, Facebook is what it is today because of that kind of like maverick type mentality. Now in the context of 2020, one can now argue, well, are they getting too big? Is their power too strong? Are they too monopolistic? You know, should they be, you know, where they are? So that's the conversation for the next decade. But this movie is kind of capturing, because there's scenes in this movie that you can tell that they maybe didn't realize what they were kind of like portraying, right? If you fast forward to the film with the Sean Parker scene, right? What we just discussed was that scene, right? Sean Parker tells Zuckerberg, everybody with the suits want to tell you, oh, cool, you got it this far. We'll show you how it's done. But their time is over. And honestly, the 2010 to 2020, like the time period that movie came out, like, the time period that movie, you know, has, not captured.
But it's followed that movie.
Yeah, that followed that movie. We've seen that, like, a lot of the business people that were, you like this comment I'm going to make, they write for Harvard Business now are just trying to rip off these lingo and make it their own ideas now, because.
Sure, man. I mean, look at people who are railing against cryptocurrencies as like fraud and whatever. Some of those same people 6 years ago that were saying that are now like saying it's necessary. Yeah, like they're always like behind the trend.
Yeah, and I think this even again goes to like those business practices and those like engineering practices where like it was, oh, this is not going to work, and now everybody wants to do this, right? I don't talk to any company that doesn't want to deploy that day if they could. Right, the whole 2 week or deploy next quarter, they look at you now like, what is this, 1999?
What are you, my grandpa?
Like we only do that if we're putting software on the rocket or NASA. Okay, that makes sense because it's one shot works or it blows up. But like if I'm building like a website, right? Like, okay, it breaks, but if I can fix it in 20 seconds, or I can revert back to the previous version that was stable, that's what people do. That's why people don't really see the outages unless they're really, really bad. Like, oh, YouTube's down, right? But even when there's bugs, like Netflix is very famous for this. When there's issues, they actually hide it from you. What they'll do is let's say your recommendation feed is broken. Like it's not working. It's not working out. Like their systems say like red alert, but the user will actually sometimes just see a randomized like trending, a cached trending list.
That's smart. You just get put into this loop.
Yeah, you don't even realize because maybe your part of your interests do overlap with other people's, right? So maybe you just keep scrolling down. You're like, oh yeah, I like this, versus the personalization. But that kind of stuff is all like was pioneered by like guys like Facebook, where like and other, obviously I want to give credit to Google and other companies and Netflix too. But these newer companies pioneered like that thought of like, even if you're like down, you're not really down because the user doesn't think you're down. Even though you're like behind the scenes, like, putting away the fires. So yeah, it's very interesting how like this movie does try to touch those themes where now 10 years later, we see that like, it's really like, we know who really won. But yeah, going back to the earlier in the movie. So after Face Smash, so what did you think of the Winklevoss twins? Like, because they kind of represent like the old system, right? Like, and even
the old money, man. I mean, they're
pompous, yeah.
They're your sort of, like I said earlier, like old money, like supposed to come from like your upper class family, probably somewhere in the Northeast. Your grade A type athletes, right? They were both rowers, and they're perfect, and everything was supposed to go right for them. And I love one of my favorite lines in the whole movie was like Mark was talking to I believe it was one of the lawyers in the arbitration meeting. And he says, oh, yeah. She's like, I don't hate. She's like, you hate the Winklevoss twins, don't you? She's like, I don't hate them. They just hate me because for the first time in their lives, everything hasn't gone the way it was supposed to. And I was just like, wow. I was like, that is so true. That's exactly like, for as awkward as he is, he's very perceptive in many situations. At least Mark Zuckerberg's character is in this movie. Because I was like, oh, that was such a good line, observation.
Yeah, because I agree. We're like, it's pretty much like even now, right? Where are they? Like, they're still like fine, right? Like I said, they're into Bitcoin. They have their Gemini. They do investments. The Facebook thing was a speed bump for them. Like it was like they didn't get maybe they're not like the CEOs of Facebook, but like you said, like I have a hard time being like, oh, woe is them because they lost out on being
I don't think anyone has much sympathy for them in this film. Right, I think you might get irritated with Zuckerberg and his arrogance, but they're not exactly people that you are going to be quick to defend.
Exactly. What was interesting is I forgot that I think, is it Rashida Jones, her name? Like she was like a lawyer in this film, and I remember her from Parks and Rec, and I'm like, I forgot that you're in this movie.
Yeah, I mean. It was going to be a big hit. They kind of figured that, so she'd take whatever role.
Probably. So I'll leave it to you. Is there any scenes that like stick out to you, or anything you want to like, any deeper topic that I might be able to shine some light on?
No. So I will say like another scene that was cool, and I don't know how true this is, but I could see the importance at the moment was just when they realize they are at some party or something like that, and they're like, hey, and these two Asian girls go up to them. And they're like, basically, they're like fans. They're like, oh, shit, you created I love that too, the Facebook. Right? And so, well, that was part of the story, though. And so, and clearly they have other like fans of theirs, and they're like, they're into both Eduardo and Zuckerberg. And then she ends by saying, just Facebook me. It's just interesting how lingo like that really sort of catches on where you don't really think of it, but it's like, man, that's going to be like a fire kind of a line that's just going to be used as typical slang and pretty much just gets accepted into society. I mean, the other sort of app that you can, when it was super popular, was Snapchat. And it's just like, oh yeah, give me your Snapchat or just snap me. Those like just become like quick little like lingo things that just get picked up in an everyday conversation. It's just interesting. I remember when Facebook was like super hot. Like when we were in high school, this is going to date us a little bit. High school and like early college years, that's when it was like at its peak. I would say Facebook, in terms of usage, just kind of gone down to an extent. Instagram kind of took its place in terms of popularity. Twitter for sure, but during that time, it was definitely at like the height of its social media impact.
Yeah, the wall thing was huge. You know.
Oh yeah. But yeah, so it's just interesting how it's like, man, you just hear like sometimes I've done that when I've heard a term. It's like, man, that would just be something that you could tell is just going to get adopted pretty easily.
Yeah, like Google it. Yeah,
yeah, just Google it. There's stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was just funny, and then I was like, wow, these guys. So one of the other things that I don't know how true this is, but it was just interesting is more like when they're doing. This is earlier in the film. When they're shuttling in these busloads of girls into like it was like the Phoenix basically hazing days, and they're just shuttling them in, and they're basically like they're just viewing these like women as a trophy. I was just like, this is such a like sick, twisted, like it's just funny because you think they're like. I love also the Winklevoss's ignorance. We're Harvard men. We can't sue. And they're like, we have to be like. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah. We like because they're having.
We're men. That's what he says. We are men of honor. We don't sue. We act a certain way. And it's just like and you see that, and it's like Harvard, and then you see the juxtaposition of that with like how these people at the Phoenix Club are behaving, right? They're just basically viewing all these like women as like. As like property in a way, right? Because they're just shipping them in. It's such an honor to get into this party. It's just like you guys are so arrogant. It's ridiculous, but it was just pretty funny.
Yeah, what's interesting is that like I've read a book on not fraternities. That's on my list, but I read one about sororities, and like yes, they all have the same attributes, but the difference between sororities at like San Jose State or fraternities. Or let's say San Diego State or any university, right? Like more of a state school level, like like Rutgers or whatever. And let's say Harvard or Georgia or Alabama is like it's like a different world. Like, yeah, they still have the same kind of like
They still have the same structure though, dude.
Structure,
I've been there,
like
but
what's different? What's different is that. What's different is that busing thing does happen actually at these like very affluent universities, which was like something that I had when I watched this, I was like, this doesn't really happen. I looked at it, I was like, oh, it doesn't.
And it does. Yeah, I just couldn't believe this like type of crap goes on. It was just, I don't know. It's a different world. But then like you could tell that they're just like you could tell that they're just on another sphere in terms of the mentality from like the rest of the student population there. I'm sure. That's what like it was kind of like. I was like, well, I can't just believe this because these guys buy their own BS in a way.
And what I thought was funny about the whole, like, when they're debating multiple scenes about whether they should sue because they're Harvard men, I like how they reached the conclusion of, oh, we can't technically sue, like, before they actually go to the lawsuit round.
Oh, the handbook?
The handbook. Oh, yeah, the handbook. See? And then they actually get a meeting with Larry Summers, who I'm not going to say my opinion of that guy yet.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I want to get your full opinion on this scene.
Larry Summers is an insider who is corrupt and should be in front of Congress explaining his actions. But I also like that he was the head of like Harvard. I'm telling you, this is all like a cycle. Like
he worked for he was Treasury, right?
He did,
in the Clinton administration.
Yeah. He's
anyway, go ahead.
But anyway, he's probably an advisor for Biden, anyways. But. The whole scene was interesting because Larry just like he laughs at them, right? And he dismisses them, and he goes like, "You're only here because like, you have connections, which is true, right? They only got that meeting."
Yeah, he's not wrong. And he's like, "You're just wasting my time." Oh, I love how they said, "Oh yeah," in the student handbook it says that the students can't steal. Yeah, from the university. And he's like, "What do you mean from the university? He stole from us." He's like, "Not my problem," basically. It's just like made me laugh. I was like, the dismissal.
And also that's how the university thinks too. It's like, oh yeah, the rules are there to protect the university. We don't care what happens between students.
Yeah, I was just laughing. I was like, that's so true. And then he's like, if you have an issue with this, he's like, take it to the courts, the student courts. I was just laughing. I was like, well, it's just a way of sort of shoving like any sort of responsibility.
And in the end, they did take it to the courts and they get their payout. But yeah, they were trying to avoid it because they were gentlemen of Harvard. So,
well, one of the brothers was. The other was like, I can't believe you're like stupid naivety here.
Yeah, like
which it was. It was incredibly naive.
Yeah, the what's interesting is that Zuckerberg did have to pay out, but it is true that like they wanted Zuckerberg to basically build Facebook for them, and they launched their own site. It's called Connect You, but obviously this happens all the time. I think a lot of people can relate.
It's the first mover, dude.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people can relate, and I think why Zuckerberg had to pay is that it became kind of like very, not I wouldn't say obvious, but like through the emails that they were able to collect, that like he was basically delaying their project so he could launch first. But the bigger point here is that this happens a lot where like you have all these guys that have ideas and then they just want like somebody else to build it for them and do all the work.
Sure.
And Zuckerberg was like, I'm doing this and I'm getting all the credit, you know, and sorry. He has another, like you said, that I think that same scene, he says the when you mentioned before about like, you know, when he tells them like, you know, this is the first time like things didn't go your way. I don't know if it's that scene or another scene where he says like, if you invented Facebook, you would have built it. I actually agree with that. If you had invented Facebook, you would have built it. I mean, it's like just because everybody has an idea.
Just because you have an idea, but like, you don't put. I have a lot I have that I've never put into practice. Right?
Exactly.
I don't have the know-how.
Yeah, I don't. It's or just like in general, like I have an idea and okay, I wrote a blog post about it, but I didn't do anything. Like there is something about like I got it to market, I got like users to use it.
I built it.
Yeah,
that's what it is at the end.
Or I was there every day and like building it with the team, right? That was the problem with the Winklevosses, right? They wanted, and I see this a lot with people, even I know personally, like a lot of like, oh well, I have the ideas, I'll be the vision guy, and then you know, I'll check in every 6 months with you. It's like if you're in it, like because even okay, Zuckerberg did turn on Eduardo eventually, but in the beginning, he went to Eduardo a lot because he felt like he was there with them, right? And more steps of the way than the Winklevosses who just wanted to check in every like month, you know? So, you know, I think there is something to that. Is there any, I was going to ask you a question about this movie because this doesn't come up often. What did you think of the portrayal of the Silicon Valley? I noticed that like rewatching this, I noticed that there are still many stereotypes of like how Californians are, especially in the Bay Area.
Oh yeah, going to
and
you're talking about when they rent for the summer, right?
Yeah. So we're skipping over some scenes I do want to talk about with Sean Parker because that's what the move.
We'll get to that,
but I'm curious about your thoughts. Yeah, when they move there and they're already like destroying, like they're doing the.
I mean,
the jumping into the pool and stuff. Go ahead.
I mean, so is that
zip line
the experience of every Californian? No. Have I heard stories of things like that happening? Yeah. I mean, there are people that move out there and they act reckless and they just code. I love the line where it's like, no, don't talk to him. He's wired in. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, that sounds about right for like sort of Silicon Valley language and speak. And what that also reminded me of.
I also talk like that. Don't talk to me when I'm wired or when I'm coding, dude. Like I'm in the zone.
When you're wired in.
I don't say wired in. I say when I'm like I'm in the zone and like I just don't bother.
No, but wired in really reminded me of what was it called? Oh, Serial Experiments Lane. Because they always like talked about the wired in that anime. But yeah, it was. I mean, obviously it's fictionalized, it's dramatized, but to some extent there are startups, I would imagine, in the area that are doing stuff like that. You might live next to them as neighbors and you wouldn't know, but they're supposed to be like the next little incubator. Now, is it a complete frat mentality like they made it out to be? No, it's not like that everywhere, but I'm sure there are some individuals out there who do behave like that.
Don't worry, I have a huge monologue on this later, but
in terms of how they set up Facebook the portrayal of Facebook headquarters, some of the layouts of the buildings. Yeah, that's very, very much Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
like almost to a T.
No, yeah, it's yeah.
All right, so
think,
what was your what was your feeling towards that? Their representation of California.
With this one, I don't have much of a problem in the sense that like I understand that like they're trying to capture not just the moment in time, but also a different California. Like it's people I think don't recognize that like what the California is just in the 10 years since that movie. Because I have my interpretation is that they were trying to capture 07, 06, 07, Silicon Valley, right? But now we know that like now it's like with how the property prices are, you can't even do what they did anymore, right? Like look at the amounts they were saying. Oh, you only need 25,000 to rent for the summer. I was like, more like a lot more for like 5 people.
Was it 25,000? I thought it was a lot less than that.
Maybe it was 15.
It was like 18.
Something, whatever the number was, I was like, yeah, sure. Not today's economy. For
that house, they might have for like 3 months.
But all the cost of living, like everything else, I feel like they would run.
Well, with the amount of damage they did, yeah, it's probably more. I would have. You could definitely live for 3 months on 18 grand. Dude. So not be overly like crazy with those estimated numbers.
Yeah, I feel unrealistic still.
But like blowing off chimneys and stuff like that, well, yeah, that's gonna add up, and that's not realistic.
But with so to your point about the frat stuff, I think that's something that's evolved today. Like, when I go back to the Silicon Valley, one of my gripes is that I see that like, and this is something I wanted to save to my ending monologue, but I'll say it now, is that the movie does highlight to me that like the people who are now like amazing in the Silicon Valley, they are like tech bros now. And I think a lot of the quirky people are still there, obviously, because it absorbs so much talent. But I have the feeling that like, especially when like you go out, like we're out of the area now, but you were there a bit longer than I was. And I don't know, to me, I had to roll my eyes when like basically like 6 out of the 10 people you meet at the bar, like, oh, I work in tech. And then like
they all work in tech.
Yeah, some of them will say like they're software engineers because there's a lot, right? When I moved to New Jersey, what surprised me was that like I had to explain my profession to people. I actually was lucky, I guess, because I never had to do that when I was in the Bay. Everybody's like, "Oh,
no." Tech is all encompassing too. I hated that term because it was so generic.
Yeah,
it never really. Even people in like on the business side of technology firms, they'd say, "I'm in tech." Yeah, but that doesn't really clearly define like what you do.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Your role's very different. You could be an HR at a tech company. You're in HR. You're not really on the tech side of it.
The other issue I see is that there's just a lot of hubris around tech. So I'll get into that. So basically, at least when Zuckerberg was starting out, it was still in that little mini golden age, I consider, where there was a lot of industries that were ripe for disruption, right? So Google disrupted search. Facebook disrupted social media because it did what other social medias couldn't do. Even like Napster disrupted music. And there's other examples I'm thinking of. But now, like I look at like these tech companies, and they are like WeWork, right? They are either WeWork or they're the new hot startup with like the selling mattresses. And I go like, how is that tech? You're just selling.
You can't criticize WeWork, Chris. You worked at a WeWork space.
That's I still criticize WeWork. But what I mean is that those aren't really. I would say that WeWork is really a real estate company, but everybody wants to be part of the tech because they get the crazy evaluations if they just say tech a lot.
If you're just viewed as a real estate company, you're not going to get the money.
Yeah. So like DoorDash is a great example, right? One could argue that DoorDash is really not a tech company. It's really a
it's a taxi service.
It's a taxi food delivery service. The only reason I don't say Uber is because Uber now has like 50 verticals, and I don't even like. I guess now they're a tech company because they're in all these different industries. But DoorDash is pretty clear. Like they do food delivery, and that's really it. And other than the app, fine. But can you really say they're a tech company? Are they building infrastructure? Are they building new practices? They're probably not, right? Like they're just probably like a platform that is trying to somehow IPO, make money.
That term is just applied indiscriminately anymore, of being like a tech firm, and like the term disruption is just like so overused anymore that it's kind of ridiculous. We know companies that claim to be disruptors. It's like, what are you really disrupting? What are you really selling? And there's no real clear answer.
Even
right?
Facebook,
it's kind of like that. Dang, it's like when I don't know if you read that much on Enron. It's kind of like Enron. It's like you have these crazy numbers and evaluations, but you don't really know what they were selling. Like even inside analysts at Goldman and JP Morgan at the time were like kind of threw their hands up. They're like, we don't really know. Enron's like they make the figures. We don't really know what they're involved in, and it's kind of a black box. But we're going to invest. Yeah, it's kind of like with some of these companies. It's like, what the heck are you selling? And you're hitting all these, or like you're getting these crazy evaluations. But what is your real like value, or like worth? No one can really tell you. It's all speculative.
Yeah, I would even say with Facebook, I was going to say this last thought on this topic, is that you could really say it's not really a tech company either. It's a social media company that happens to.
Well, what's a tech company in your mind then?
A tech, no, I hate that term because I feel like that term now is just thrown everywhere. Dude, tech company used to be.
I mean, are you a tech company like Intuitive Surgical? Would you consider that tech?
No, the term in general.
They're an engineering company.
There is no tech companies. That's my whole point.
Oh, okay.
You know, that's the term is still, like you said, it's so blanket that like if you do anything with software, now it's tech. When you should really say that like Facebook is a social media company. You know, Google's, I guess you can say it's a search algorithm. Well, actually, Google's huge now. That's a bad example. But like you said, like you can say like these other companies, surgical ones, why don't they say they're tech companies? Like you said, like they're doing something that's technical. You know, it's a term is like I looked at that term now, like it's just now a buzzword like everything else nowadays.
Like disrupt.
Yeah, that one I like.
I know you. I know you're very opinionated on certain terms, being in that sort of field.
Yeah. There's a lot of terms, you know, like nimble, agile. It's like, okay, give me a break.
Little software as a service.
Yeah, software as a service. That's another good one, dude. Not now. It's platform as a service, dude. That's the new thing.
Everything's a service.
Yeah, everything's a banking as a service. There we go. Everything's a service, dude.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so jumping back to the film real quick. I think. Yeah, because again, those scenes, like when they go to California and like Sean Parker says like all the cool stuff is happening in California. I think that's changed a lot in recent, like the last like 3 years. But I think definitely in like 2005 to like 2011.
Bro, that's where you had to be.
Yeah, that's where the mentality.
It's like if you wanted to be an actor, you had to be in Hollywood.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. If you wanted to be in technology at that point, you had to be in the Bay Area.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I don't think it's lost completely, but I think it's changed just because now there's.
Yeah, it's still there. It's just the way VC money is being distributed as of late is diversifying. Yeah. Whereas before it was heavily concentrated there, like 80% of VC money total.
And they often cite the talent thing, but the reason it's diversifying is because VCs want to, like they say, increase their runway, right? So if they're giving a company $50 million. They know that if they're paying like Bay Area real estate salaries or whatever, it's going to be, let's say, 2 years. Maybe that $50 million goes longer if they're in Austin or in another geo.
I never understood why this happened at several companies. We can talk about this later. This happened at several companies that I've like heard about or like seen talks from like people who were in like CEOs of a couple companies. And they were from out of the area, but they got money from, you know, like a Bay Area VC, and they were told that unless they moved to California, they wouldn't be like funding them. It's just like I never understood that from a VC standpoint. Why would you want people to come into an insanely expensive area where, you know, your costs are going to be astronomical when you could go to a market that still has a lot of talent and it's a lot cheaper to operate? I never got that sort of mentality.
I have the counterexample, which is what they always push. We'll see what happens with COVID. But so I read Reid Hoffman's book. I forgot which one. I read 2 of his books. They're good, but nobody on this podcast has to read those because I'm going to summarize one of the bigger points in the books.
Right.
Reid Hoffman, this background is he was basically from the PayPal mafia, but also the co-founder of LinkedIn, which everybody uses pretty much for professional social networking. And then I'm going to say his counter argument to your point, and then you're going to realize, oh, this is why we have these problems in the Silicon Valley of nepotism and also
go ahead.
So basically, Reid Hoffman says the reason you want to have people move to the Silicon Valley if you're funding them is because as a VC, because he's a VC guy now, you can help guide the founder with talent acquisition and also networking. Like your network is all like the power of the Silicon Valley is the networking, right? Like let's say like this founder needs good infrastructure guys or good business people. He's like, I have a list here. I've worked with these guys and other companies. Yeah, these companies didn't work out, but I vouch for them. Let's get them hired for your company. Oh, you need you want another funding round? Well, I can't give it to you, but I know these guys that might be interested in getting into your company. Like, oh, I know Peter Thiel. Let me get him in. It's the club. That's the very club that Zuckerberg in the film is criticizing, right? Harvard, all these inside knowers get in the room because you know your one of your funding rounds is with Reid Hoffman. Is exactly what's being created in the Silicon Valley. Is move your company here because I know these other co-founders. They'll get you more money. We'll get you the business people. We'll get you the infrastructure. We'll get you the Amazon Web Services expert. We'll get you the whatever, even biotech startups. We'll get you the expert in this field. We'll get you the tools. And then people wonder why people think that the Silicon Valley is so disconnected, right? Because if you're working at Google and then you're being recycled to work at LinkedIn and then recycled to work at hot startup X.
Then go to Apple.
Yeah, you're making the loop. Look at Robinhood, the new darling now. A lot of their exec team come from Google, right? And Facebook too. Sheryl Sandberg, she's from Google, right? And look, she's super intelligent, actually, great interviewer herself. But when outsiders from, let's say I'm from Iowa or I'm from Texas or I'm from Florida, when they look at this, they just see they see what they see in New York City, right? With Wall Street, a bunch of people that just recycle themselves as needed, depending on their better package. Like Sheryl Sandberg left Google, even though she was in a great position, great job, because she saw that Facebook could be even bigger, and she would basically be like co-CEO because Zuckerberg. That's the thing I did not talk about this podcast, but it's interesting. The book I read that Zuckerberg only wants to focus on product and legal. Everything else is Sheryl Sandberg. So she's basically in theory, she does report to Zuckerberg as a COO, but in practice, it's like they have two CEOs. it's kind of funny in that way. But like that, my whole point is that like they tend to know how to basically recycle themselves. To use an NFL analogy, we see a lot of head coaches fired and they just get rehired as assistant coordinators, right?
Yeah, it's nepotism there too.
Yeah, and then like I said, so I understand Reid Hoffman's point, but my counterpoint to your point that you said about why I moved them there is, then you can't be complaining when people from the outside go, I just see that all these companies are the same kind of companies. Even if they have different business models and different domains, they're run and their boards are all constructed the same. And so that's why like I do push back on guys like Reid Hoffman, because I think that they are drinking their Kool-Aid too much, just like the Harvard people were, right? Like, oh, I have access to I'm a Harvard member, so I should have the meetings. I should be in the room,
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you there. There is so much nepotism, especially growing up in the Bay Area and just reading about all these companies. Like, yeah, they just, like you said, it's kind of like this revolving door of like you work for Google, then you go to Apple, maybe Adobe, hit up Facebook, and that's just how it is at that point when you're at that level, especially at management.
Yeah, and this is how they end up with like really high salaries because they just keep getting that extra 10%, each hop in each stock hop too. And then that's why like when normal people can't afford, when a public school teacher is like, oh, I can't afford this 600,000 or 700 or maybe $1 million home. And then these guys go like, oh, this is just like, my first 3 years at Facebook. Here you go.
Yeah, what's crazy is I heard some story, and this is just like HR practices kind of blow my mind in some private companies. Because I heard this story from a friend of mine when this person was working at Cisco, that apparently one of their managers every 6 months would get laid off and then rehired 6 months later. But it was insane because they would get these severance packages that were just massive, right? It might not have been 6 months. It was like 6 months to 2 years based on whatever HR algorithms that they were going by. But it just like kind of blew my mind because, yeah, these packages were upwards of like hundreds of thousands of dollars that they would just get. And they got multiple severance packages during that time. I was just like, I never understood that. And it just seemed like it's, no one can really relate to that, right? Because you're so disconnected. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to lose my job, make this big money, and then just get rehired back on. Yeah. And I think this lady was like a manager for HR.
Yeah, like I said, it's just more evidence to that loop, like I said, that nepotism loop that keeps happening. Like for them, like unemployment isn't like as terrible as for most people would be. Like, oh, I'm out of a job, I can't get
Nah,
hired
bro.
again.
Hey, dude, if you got on and they're like, yeah, we're gonna lay you off, but you get $300,000 severance package. Okay, I would take that in a heartbeat.
I'll look for a job in 4 months. So anyways, going back to the film, I think we both mentioned that we were impressed with Justin Timberlake's performance in this film. So let's rewind the clock to when we're introduced to his character, and then also his big meeting with Zuckerberg in the restaurant.
That was a great scene.
What did you think? So before we get to that, we'll get to that scene. What did you think of his introduction, right, where he's hooking up with a college girl, basically, and then he discovers the Facebook, and then we'll get to the.
It was funny. I mean, from what I've heard and read, they're pretty accurate on that. He was kind of a playboy, kind of this. Yeah. How would you describe it? This sort of edgy, Silicon Valley type, because they're not. He's not like a traditional businessman, if you will, right? He started Napster, and his whole thing was like it was meant to disrupt the industry because it was a big sort of middle finger right to the music industry, because people were just sharing music MP3 files all the time, and you could find whatever song. But then, especially, it's really funny seeing how Huffy and Puffy Metallica got over a lot of Napster's practices, right? And so, like, he's just not conventional, right? Because he just wanted to disrupt the industry. Like, Napster was really a true, when you talk about disrupt, that was like one of the first ones that really disrupted and really pissed off the music industry. And so this guy just comes as a complete outsider, and he just wants to basically just shove it to like any sort of established business insiders. And so, and he sort of, the way he's portrayed, so it sort of speaks to like how he pitches to Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo in that meeting in the scene in the film. And so, like, I'm not surprised that they like decided to portray him as that, because from what I've read, correct me if I'm wrong, he actually saw like the Facebook from I think it was like his roommate's girlfriend's laptop was just open, and so he saw that. So I mean, obviously it was a little over traumatized, but that's more or less how it happened.
Yeah. And then that restaurant scene is a great scene in the movie, right? Where it's like when he says you don't know what it is, and it could be $1 billion idea, right?
No. He didn't even say that. He's like, why would I not go with ad revenue? He's like, you have like $1 million idea, and then it cuts right to Eduardo, right? And it's like, and then he said something that he's like, what's better than $1 million? And then he's like, it cuts to Eduardo back at the deposition, and he's like, and the next line kind of like made us all shut up, right? And he said $1 billion idea, and he's like, all of a sudden he's like, yeah, you can hear the pins drop basically.
Yeah, so a little I guess knowledge that I gained from like the book I read. The reason obviously Zuckerberg really liked Sean Parker because of the Napster stuff, and he had that also.
Yeah, it speaks to him, right?
But the reason he really liked Sean Parker over Eduardo, like when he started turning on Eduardo in a sense, is because Sean Parker would do all the VC meetings for him. So going back to the real Facebook story, the real life one, Zuckerberg, something that's consistent, I guess, throughout is that he doesn't like dealing with the suits. I'm going to say the term, the suits. In early Facebook, Sean Parker was handling all that. He was handling all the phone calls with business guys, board meetings, phone, and Zuck just got to focus on the product. Again, that's still what he likes to do. Now, like, again, when Sean Parker became a PR liability, he kicked him out. But that's why
which the film touches upon.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But this is why he loves Sheryl Sandberg, because she's cookie cutter. She comes from like all the elites, schools. She worked in government, and she handles all that for him because he doesn't want to deal with that. Even back then, he didn't want to deal with it. But he didn't have the know-how, right? Like he probably has a little more now, but he didn't have the know-how back then. And yeah, Sean Parker filled that void really well because, we'll get to Eduardo's Andrew Garfield's portrayal too, but. What the film I think does accurately with Eduardo is that he deserves credit for putting money in and believing in Zuck, and so I think I didn't feel bad that he got paid out, but where Facebook had to go, he was not the guy. Like he was a bit like a business major, right? He didn't have the contacts, he didn't have the know-hows yet. Sean,
I think he would today.
He would today, but back then, right? He's more of a liability than he is of.
Right.
of like contributing to the business, right? But again, his initial checks are critical. That's why I think legally Zuckerberg can't say he's not a co-founder because he was able to wipe the Winklevosses, but he can't say like the Eduardo Silva is not a co-founder because legally he is, because he put the first seed money basically. But to get where Facebook needed to go with scale, Sean Parker was vital for that because he got him. Yeah, he got him he was able to
The meeting with Peter Thiel got him the initial $500,000 angel investment.
And then Peter Thiel, another interesting his portrayal. It's only one scene, but what's interesting is that Peter Thiel's story is that, again, this is not in the movie, but Peter Thiel actually sees Facebook, and he's a Stanford PhD grad, and the reason he invested $500,000, even though that's like nothing to him, but the reason he was like big on Facebook before most people were, basically the first real seed money, other than Eduardo's like 20 or whatever he put in, is that he saw that like it's funny how I guess now I read a lot of Peter Thiel stuff, and it's interesting how now he's very concerned about like misinformation and stuff. But back then, the reason he was so beholden and why he believed that Facebook was the next big idea was because he saw the platform that people would be super obsessed about their peers. And the anxieties that brings of like, I have to look good, I have to share, I have to be on Facebook, I need to have a life, which hasn't changed, right? Even with Instagram.
No, it just shifted to Instagram now.
Yeah, and TikTok and Snapchat. But he recognizes early, and he gives credit to the teachers he learned at Stanford, famous like some actually are famous philosophers, because he says reading their books made him realize that like this is the next big thing. It's interesting connection there because he is not like a coder or whatever. He's actually a guy that like he made his thesis and basically philosophy, but he was able to connect the dots and see what others were missing, right? Like what a lot of people, AOL, all the suits were missing. He was just like, no, this is it, and boom, he's made huge. Tell you, if you put only 500,000 in Facebook and you got like, I think he got like 7-8% of the company. I mean, that's now worth, he probably sold most of it, but ridiculous amount of money, man. That's just crazy. But yeah, I thought like I said, I think we touched upon it like offline. Justin Timberlake's performance, I was like, man, this guy, like,
he could act.
His music career was like, but like,
whoa, you're not gonna trust him. I actually really like some of Timberlake's.
He's got hits, but like he's not like
he's talented, bro.
He's not going down as like a like basically.
No, but he was good. He was definitely the strongest member of his boy band back.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I guess Sexy Back is still played a lot, but but I mean, like, what I'm getting at, that like there's artists that like transcend time even. But like he had a great career. I'm not saying he didn't.
He did. He had talent, bro.
But yeah, I think he's done some films. I know this is the one I think he's most famous for.
He did Friends with Benefits too, right?
Yeah.
With Mila Kunis, I believe.
Yeah, Mila.
It's been a long time. I think I saw it back in the day.
I think I did too, but I kind of forgot.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those. Yeah, but in this performance, he was strong.
Yeah, he was strong. He was great. Yeah. So I think we can agree on that. That like it was. I know the first time I saw it, I was like, "Wow, this guy really like." I thought like, maybe he's gonna be an actor now, but I guess he only takes roles when he feels like it. So
yeah.
But yeah, we can talk about Andrew Garfield, right? So he portrayed Eduardo Silva. What's interesting about Andrew Garfield is that he actually is a really good actor, because there's other movies that I've seen where it's like, oh, he's really good, but like, I guess some people still put him in that. I forget what film like he first did that puts him in this character. I'm gonna see if I can look it up real quick. But I'm curious about what you thought about like Eduardo Silva and like Garfield's portrayal of him in general.
I thought he did a good job. It was interesting to see the dynamic of him working with Jesse Eisenberg, because you could see there was always this kind of their relationship was interesting, but you could tell that at times Mark was almost jealous of them. So it was interesting seeing their interactions play out on screen. I thought they both did a good job. They both complemented one another.
Yeah, I actually thought like Garfield's I thought he actually did a little bit better than Jesse Eisenberg. Like
He was good.
I thought they were both really good, but you know what? Even though I know the movie's about Zuckerberg, I thought like
I don't. What I couldn't believe is how could you sign a business document without having your lawyers look over it?
Yeah, I
It
guess
blew my mind.
it's called being 20 something and naive. He thought, like he said it, like he thought they were his lawyers. They're not her Facebook lawyers.
Yeah.
Oh, what did you think of? Speaking of Eduardo's character, what did you think of the crazy girlfriend he had in the movie?
It was hilarious. I was like, man, it was over the top, but I've heard stories like that. I think we know people who would be attracted to that type of personality.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was
funny, like her burning the sheet, and then afterwards, like right away after, he's like, oh yeah, he gets that call from Mark, get out to SF, and she's like, you're leaving so soon? Yes. And we're over. We're done. I'm breaking up with you.
Yeah.
I was like, man, you let that go for too long, man.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted that spicy relationship,
She was spicy a little too much, man. It's fiery because she literally burned his bed.
Yeah, that was like, I don't know if that actually happened, but I was just like, that's just scary, like.
Yeah, man. She was unhinged. That's why I said he let that go for too long.
Yeah, and then it's the actress is like, I know we mentioned this offline too, where like it threw me off because like where have I like the first time I saw it in 2010, I was like, where have I seen her before? And I was like, oh, Disney Channel. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's this The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. That's the show. But yeah, I thought like I thought even the minor characters here were pretty good, right? Like I just mentioned the lawyers, or I mentioned the lawyers, the girlfriend. Even the Winklevoss twins, you can say they're minor like side characters.
No, they were good.
They were good. I can't think of one performance that was like, because all the random ones, like you only see for one scene, they just did their lines, and the lines were good, So, right. So in that sense, I think that across the board, the film was very strong, and so, is there any other scenes that you want to break down? I guess there is the scene about the Victoria's Secret one. That's another big scene.
Well, right? Before we get to that, one little scene that we forgot to mention, but I did find hilarious was like was earlier when they first made the Facebook, and they're at some conference or like some lecture, just listening to Bill Gates. Then after they meet their families, and one guy's like, man, I don't even know like who was presenting, but basically he says something where it makes him look like a fool. He's like, you're like the next Bill Gates. So I don't even know who was like giving the speech. It was Bill Gates. And then he just looks like, oh, darn, like he just looks so foolish. I was like, that's a really funny moment.
That was funny, dude. It's like, you sound like an idiot.
Yeah, pretty much.
No, I think the last scene I want to cover was the one that, so to preface, my favorite scenes in this movie are the face smash hack, the restaurant scene, and then so that's why I give Justin Timberlake credit, because two out of my three favorite scenes in this movie are him. He's in it. But the nightclub scene is amazing, especially when he goes over the story, which is a true story about how the Victoria's Secret founder, and like how he gave up big idea too early and he regretted it. Right, he left a lot of money.
Because he sold it to what's his name, who was tied to Epstein. I can't remember. What's the guy's name who owns it now?
I have no idea. But you're right. He's tied to that creeper Epstein.
Yeah, because Epstein was like his accountant or something.
Yeah, but I forgot. I'll see if I can look it up. It's
But regarding that scene, I thought it was I don't know, just his sort of presence portraying, by presence I mean Justin Timberlake's presence portraying Parker at that point. You could tell that he had just totally like encapsulated the attention, or like he had totally got all of the attention from Mark Zuckerberg, and that he like knew that he was going to basically listen to his every word after that. That's sort of like what I got.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. So recap what. So I was just trying to look up. So what did you get out of the interaction real quick?
No, so he's telling him like all this idea. Basically, like Mark Zuckerberg was just like, you could tell after that. I was like, okay, he's gonna listen to like everything that Sean Parker has to say.
I got you. No,
That was a moment where I kind of realized, yeah, it's like full lock and step. And I felt like after that, like Eduardo was going to get phased out.
Yeah, I think what I like about that scene is that to me it represents a nostalgic view of the Silicon Valley I grew up in, because Sean Parker tells Zuckerberg, right, that you've been looked over, you've been cast aside as weird, or the girls didn't like you or whatever. And now it's your time. It's our time to basically rewrite the rules and stuff. And,
well, he told him exactly what he wanted to hear.
Yeah, and then like he says, like, don't be impressed by all this. This will be you, which is kind of true. If anything, he's.
But I also loved. I love that ending scene because he said that he made Napster because he was pissed out of a girlfriend. He's like, "You ever think back on it?" He's like, "No."
Yeah, now I'm loaded. I don't care. I have models now draping around me. Yeah. So it's but I think that is, I think it's changing a lot, but it's like that scene does encapsulate, I think, like a young.
The other thing is just so funny because it's like the models in that scene, you can tell that they like them because they're like almost like they are celebrities basically at that, or at least Sean Parker is. He's viewed as that. So he gets all of the women, but it's just interesting because it's a completely different field. It's not like athletics; it's just programming and business.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been out in the Silicon Valley. It's kind of like it's too unbearable though. That's why I don't even like going out there, because now like everybody thinks they're like Sean Parker, and it's like, okay. The tech. Okay, here's my little rant because we're kind of done with we're almost wrapped up in the movie. Mm-hmm. We have more stuff. Is that the tech bro culture? You see, almost this movie is also capturing what we eventually will see as where it's kind of having foresight is that we see where the tech bro culture, why it like kind of shifted that way. Like it got confused between money and like writing like imports and code. Like honestly, I always tell people, especially younger engineers, like, unless you're like really disrupting like an entire industry, the software you're writing for whatever X company that, let's say it's like, I won't name the company, but let's say it's procurement software, or HR software. People act like high and mighty that they're changing the world and they're helping businesses. And this is not just the coders, that they're the worst.
B2B, man, business to business.
Yeah, because they are. The software engineers in general do have, even if they go to academia, there is this God complex stuff. But yeah, even the normal tech workers, they start believing in the Kool-Aid that like, oh yeah, we're helping businesses save trillions of dollars and we're like the reasons the economy is booming. And it's like, okay, like I just roll my eyes like, okay, you're not, the things you're doing are not that important. And I think unfortunately, the money has come in. And now they all go to the nightclub like Sean Parker does. And now they go like, oh, look at me, making it rain because, my stock price just went up like, 40%. So, right. I'm here as kingmaker, and I think, and this is sad because I think, the region had a lot of like, when I look at like the early 90s,
innovative ideas
with the cyberpunk movement that really originated in the Bay Area, you see that like, look, the idea of open source, the idea of free software
that's been sold out to Wall Street, man.
That's what's happened in our lifetimes. We've seen the transition from like an engineering that was like, or a region that was kind of like either naive about the world or they're open-minded, to now it's like, there's a reason why every company is trying to rush to get their IPOs out because they want to get that cash in, they want to cash out, and now it's more like that. It's more seen like I said, a business vehicle than it is like, are we trying to build something? Are we trying to do anything? But I think we see this a lot now in the Valley. And unfortunately, people are confusing, the money they're getting with like how important they are. And all these issues we see in the Bay Area, I think they kind of represent what's seeing in the world, right? We talked about Burning. We talked about other films like I Am Daniel Blake, where we have these disconnected people because they've gone really wealthy the last 20 years. And then they go like, oh, why is there so many homeless people? Well, I don't know, because maybe a teacher can't afford the expensive apartments that you're paying out. Like, but it's just all like, it doesn't compute because they just see the money.
It's a disconnect. It's a disconnect where I honestly don't understand how the service industry employees, how they make it there.
It's called the gig economy, which California's voted
Well,
against.
yeah, and that they're still like living on the streets practically, man. Or in like, I'd seen this increase like when I was living in the Bay, where you see a lot of people living out of RVs, can't afford it.
Yeah, the best.
It's just become this crazy gap.
One of the analogies to wrap up a little bit, a coworker told me once was that to explain this phenomenon is that like when you like, so his analogy was like when you let's say you're thirsty and you drink out of a hose, right? Normally you have a little bit, right? And you sip it, but like people who are getting all this money, the hose is basically blasting into their face. So they have no way of, I like this analogy because I think there's some truth to it. They have no way to like, if water was blasting your face, you wouldn't be looking left and right, which is the real world, because you're just seeing all the money just flowing. You're just seeing your pockets just bolden up, you know? And then because you're so distracted because you're getting bombarded with this, you're like, oh wait, there's
you don't see the other faucets that are running dry.
Exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much his analogy. Because I've had these. I think it's an age-old.
That's a good one. I like that one.
The and because he was somebody that worked in. He's from Jersey, but like he had met Steve Jobs before he was Steve Jobs, because he started his career in the 80s, and people forget that New Jersey's where AT&T, all the initial computer innovation happened.
Bell Labs, son.
Yeah, before it shifted all the way to the place we grew up. And yeah, he would fly over and like, they were still like rising. And then like when he, because he kept doing back and forth travels, but he could see the change already in the 90s, that the money was coming in, not like it did for Bell Works even. And like people were getting rich quick, having sites like pets.com. And
the .com bust.
Yeah. And that has kept evolving, right? Because now the money's even bigger, right? Like even in this COVID crisis, it's these tech stocks, it's killing it, So when you're an employee at, like, let's say Amazon or whatever, you are only seeing your world, because like even if you're trying to peer out, like there's just so much coming your way that like you don't have time, right? Like, you have more stock, you have more cash. Hey, I'm gonna go travel. I'm gonna do this. Now with COVID, maybe you're forced to go home, but in general, before COVID, like the money was so good in the world. Like when you're able to like order like food, like when the company's sending you food to your door, like you have a hard time even interacting with service workers, even, right? Like people, if you think about it, like I interviewed at Google once, and they live in an echo chamber because they don't actually have to leave their office to have like a normal life, right? They can go to the free kitchen, get the smoothie, get the gym workout. And then if they want to like eat outside, they where Google has them in New York is in a very nice area. So they can go outside, walk 2 blocks, and there they have all these restaurants and stuff. They're not ever going to go to like the Bronx or like other parts of like deep Brooklyn. They don't have to.
Harlem.
They don't even have to walk a block to like everything they need is within the radius, so.
Yep.
But anyways, you want to get into ratings real quick, or you have any other final thoughts on this film?
No, I mean, I think we covered and gave some of our strong opinions on this film, and really the context surrounding the sort of industry that they were covering. So yeah, I can get into ratings. So for me personally, I was kind of going back and forth a little bit, but I think it's more in the range. I give this film an 8.5. I thought it's very rewatchable for sure. I think some of the more, like you were saying, some of the points that they were trying to make up have not aged well in terms of necessarily being Mark Zuckerberg being disconnected. But the strong acting performances were like a real big plus, as well as the screenwriting. And I just liked overall the pace. Like some films, you kind of like look at the time like, man, how much longer is this? Like I've done that a couple times before. Whereas with this, it was like really steady, like pace where like you, at the end of the film, you're like, wow, it was already 2 hours. Like it didn't seem like there was like sort of, and there were no really like wasted scenes, I would say, in this film by and large. I can't give it a higher rating because I really didn't like the ending, but that was just like a pretty big personal thing to me.
Yeah, I'm in the same region. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I think a really good movie, like anything in my 8 range is like a good movie. So, but the ending, that was a good point. I think for me, the main thing that after my 3rd time in a decade watching it, is kind of like, some of the, I guess, I don't want to say guesses, but some of the I guess, implicit messages didn't age well. But also here, I'm actually gonna. I can't believe I'm actually doing this, but I'm actually gonna defend Zuckerberg in a sense that like I think they were a bit over exaggerated with his portrayal to make the emphasis when I don't think they needed to do that to portray him the way they like. I think they could have done even more of a realistic portrayal. I have a hard time believing that he was.
When you go with the over the top,
yeah, he was that over the top on like all those instances. You know, I have no doubt going off of his blog post that he was probably pompous, arrogant, all those things. Right?
Very arrogant.
But you know, like him. Like you know that scene where he's clicking because he doesn't like the meeting. He's just clicking his tongue the whole time. Like, I have a hard time even believing that a arrogant Zuckerberg would do that. I feel like he would just not show up to the meeting. You know what I mean? Like, you know, there were scenes in there. I think they were just there to emphasize like this guy is so arrogant and like doesn't care about like other people's opinions and stuff. When you know he probably did because he's still human. And look, the other guy that's a minor character, Dustin Moskovitz. Like I said, I mentioned him earlier. You know, it's a guy that he deeply respected and did talk to. You know, and he probably was not as the portrayal is probably like not as is on the right track of an early Zuckerberg, but probably it is still over exaggerated for thematic purposes.
Sure, it's a dramatized film.
Yeah, and you know there is that. I guess where we both agree is that if the movie didn't kind of like try to basically have a bit of a opinion on this character, I think would have given the movie even more of an oomph. Because like you said, the ending probably is the best example of like they wanted to make it seem like, oh, he's so lonely, and it's like I want to be that lonely if I'm that rich. It's not even that lonely. Are you kidding me? He looks pretty like fine with his family and friends, you know. Even though he bought all the neighborhoods around him, so he doesn't have to deal with that. And
he's all I mean, he is married, so.
Yeah. Also, people who are friends with him, they genuinely say that they're friends with him. Like they just talk to Mark as if he's normal. You know. I guess in business it gets messy, right? That's what they say, right? Don't go to business sometimes with your friends and family. So, But yeah, I think we're in the same ballpark of scores. I think this is a movie that is very like, you can sit down, watch it, and it's like a decent meal, you know, like it's like you'll eat it like at a good pace and be like, oh, I'm done, you know, it was good, right? It's not a movie that I sit back and go, oh, I want to like keep dissecting it and stuff, but it's also a movie that I think is, ironically, with our current political climate and also the conversation around big tech, it's a movie that's probably very still relevant, you know, even for posterity reasons.
So if you want to hear something that was interesting and it might give you some reason why they might have chosen to portray Zuckerberg like this. Apparently, Zuckerberg, nobody at like Facebook or Zuckerberg were actually asked to like be involved with this project, or even in the book that this movie was based on, Accidental Billionaires. But Eduardo in real life was actually used as a consultant. So that probably skews it a bit.
That probably explains a lot. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you know what's interesting is that the Eduardo guy, you're right, because he has the most, like, let's say, like this movie stopped in 2010, right? But we have what happened after as some evidence, right? Like this movie does portray him as like someone who was like the most innocent guy, right? Oh, I gave money, I trusted Mark, and I got screwed. Yet the guy ditches his citizenship to make sure he doesn't pay taxes.
Yeah.
So to Mark's point, like, it's probably one of those the truth, like the real truth. At least the one I'm gonna go to bed with is probably all of these people are just basically like not good actors.
They're slimy, dude.
And Zuckerberg, just because he's the one that really won in the end, gets all the baggage. But you know, the movie obviously stops in 2010, right? But we know that, like, you know, was it 4 years later he's gonna just ditch his citizenship to not pay taxes? It's like, so how are you the hero of your own, like, the story that he was probably trying to portray himself as the innocent victim, I bet, in 2010. And look, now that we know what he's like, I always say this, right? Or it's an old cliche, right? Actions speak louder than words. It's like, cool it, you know, like we know that you're not like this
perfect man.
This woe is me, I got screwed by Zuckerberg. I mean, woe is you. You also didn't want to pay any taxes, dude. Even Zuckerberg pays.
Yeah, and you have 13 billion now. It's like calm down.
Yeah, so I think I give credit to Garfield for his story, but yes, to your point, thank you for bringing it up. I think, Eduardo's portrayal is probably, it's like, you're right. It's like the opposite. Zuckerberg's probably too harsh, but it's still probably truthful. And Eduardo's probably too endearing, and it probably could be shifted a little bit more to be realistic. I think if they did that, I think I would have given this movie like a 9. But now that I have the history to look at, I go, this is sometimes when I have problems with what I call like, the director being editor. It's like, I see that you had an opinion, and it's still, you can see it in the movie, which I think does a disservice to the movie.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree.
All right, so I think we got it. It was good.
Well, cool. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed our commentary on this film, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned till next week.